Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou wouldest be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forever. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor.
I've received the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, October 27 for confirmation. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of Wednesday, October 27th be confirmed. 2021 be confirmed.
The question is that those minutes be confirmed. Honourable Senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Minutes stand confirmed. In terms of other announcements, I have excuses for absence from Senator Walcott, Senator Franklin, and Senator Moore, and an indication of late arrival from Senator Grant and Senator Haynes.
Presentation of papers.
Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the Needham's Point Holdings Limited Annual Report 2020 and the Needham's Point Development Incorporated Annual Report 2020.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate are moved by a minister.
Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Standing Order 22-1 and 45-2 be suspended for the duration of this sit-in so that we may complete certain matters before this honorable chamber in their totality.
The question is that the standing order so mentioned be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The standing orders are therefore suspended.
Introduction of bills.
Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2021. The resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5, the Land Acquisition Act, Cap 228, the compulsory acquisition by the Crown of parcels of land at Sergeant's Village in the parish of Christ Church in this island for the public purpose, namely housing development. And the resolution that Parliament take note and approve the Charter of Barbados 2021.
First reading of bills.
Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Debt Settlement Arrears Bill 2021, of the Customs Bill 2021, of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2021.
The question is that those bills so mentioned be read a first time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 5, sir.
Order number 5.
Order number 5. In the name of the acting leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2021.
Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2021, it proposes, sir, to amend the Gold Award of Achievement Act, Cap 401/2002. Now, through this amendment, sir, we are seeking to do 3 things. 1, to expand on whom this award can be conferred. In this situation, sir, it is a situation where the current legislation that governs this particular award, it says that we can confer this only on a single individual. We are seeking through this amendment to expand on whom, so that we can now give this award to a collective of people, a group of people, several at one point as part of one award. The second thing this amendment is intended to do is to extend when annually this award can be given. Currently, it speaks of it being done National Heroes Day for the year preceding National Heroes Day. We wish now to extend this to include Independence Day, the year preceding Independence Day, so that this award may now be given on either Independence Day or on National Heroes Day. And the third thing we are seeking to do with this amendment, sir, is to expand the eligibility for the award, so that we have included other areas of meritorious service or achievement which can be included, so that the eligibility for this award would now read that through diligence, sacrifice, dedication to service, and commitment to excellence, that the person on whom it has been conferred, the person or group on whom it is confirmed, that they have made an outstanding contribution to community life in Barbados, the improvement of economic and social conditions of Barbados, or, and this is the additional part, the health and welfare of the people of Barbados. Sir, so it is these 3 things: on whom, when, and the eligibility. You may recall, sir, that provision for this Gold Award of Achievement was originally made part of the letters patent of 1980 from Her Majesty the Queen. You will recall that just about a few weeks ago, the last sitting, I believe it was, of this Honorable Senate, we determined that we would have a new dispensation for national awards and national honors and decorations, and the letters patent or letters patent were set aside, and we would no longer be using that. However, you will recall that also in that last bill that was passed for the national honors and awards, that this Gold Award of Achievement was included. However, there was an anomaly in that, as I mentioned earlier, in the particular legislation that speaks to the Gold Award of Achievement, it spoke only of giving it to an individual, and they had the other limitations, which I mentioned earlier, that would be addressed by this amendment, this proposed amendment. Sir, this Gold Award Achievement is different than the Gold Trident of Excellence. That is a part of our national awards and honors. And what is the difference? The difference fundamentally is that the Gold Trident of Excellence is for over an extended period of work, a body of service, body of achievements over an extended period. This Gold Award of Achievement speaks more specifically to the year preceding the independence or the National Heroes Day. So that is the big difference in that regard, sir. There is specific clauses that speak to the three amendments that I have mentioned. We do propose now, sir, and from what I am informed by those who govern the protocols of this country, that the Gold Award of Achievement, in the order of precedence, it would sit just below the Order of the Republic. My information from the protocol department is that the top award would still remain our national hero. The next in line would be the Order of Freedom of Barbados. The next in line is the Order of the Republic, and I'm told by protocol next would be the Gold Award of Achievement, then the Gold Trident of Excellence, then the Silver Trident of Excellence, the Barbados Service Star, the Barbados Service Medal, the awards for bravery and gallantry. Then, of course, we have additional awards on our landscape, the Pride of Barbados Awards. We have the Prime Minister's Leadership Awards. We have a Humanitarian Service Award, the Barbados Centennial Honor, which has now been passed. It was done at the Centennial. And, of course, the Barbados Jubilee Award, again, of the past, which was for the Jubilee. But they still remain because we have not repealed those legislations. So, sir, it is with these few words and with the intention that this amendment now allows us to expand on whom it can be conferred, when annually the award can be confirmed, and the eligibility for that award. With that being the intention of this amendment, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
The speakers, Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair, and I beg to move that this bill be again read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and this Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. President, Chairman, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
The question is that clause 4 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 5 stand part.
The question is that clause 5 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 6 stand part.
The question is that clause 6 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 7.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 7 stand part.
The question is that clause 7 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to this bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
Question is that this bill be now read a third time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator McConney.
Yes. Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Act 2021. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is so passed and so cited.
Order number 6, sir.
Order number 6.
Order number 6, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, by assigned to the Honourable Senator Ms. Cummins. To move the passing of a resolution that Parliament take note and approve the Charter of Barbados 2021.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise on this occasion to present perhaps what is one of the most seminal pieces of documentation that we could pass in this moment as we make the steady march towards creating a new republic for our nation, Mr. President. Mr. President, a few weeks ago, here in this place, we had an extensive debate around the amendments to the Constitution, which would have established a president for Barbados and the transition from the role of Governor General to a president. Today, Mr. President, on the eve of our independence, we now move to have not yet a new Constitution, and I will treat to that during the course of my presentation, but we move to have a new charter, Mr. President, a charter that does not have any legal basis, it cannot be used in a court of law. It is not, in the words of the lawyers in the other place, justiciable. I am not a lawyer, so I chose not to use that word deliberately. It is not a legally binding document. It is not an item for which, Mr. President, a person who feels as though their fundamental rights and freedoms have been infringed on and can use to make a petition for either criminal or civil remedies before a court of law. That is not what it is. We are not here, Mr. President, today to begin the debate on a new constitution for Barbados. That time will come, and it has been spoken of on more than one occasion, Mr. President, by the Honourable Prime Minister of Barbados, who has left no ambiguity despite a lot of the continued contention around the subject. But our Honourable Prime Minister on every occasion has said unequivocally, this is not a new constitution. The new constitution, Mr. President, our Prime Minister has said, and I believe the Office of the Attorney General that has responsibility for legal matters, they have also said repeatedly, Mr. President, that the new constitutional process will commence in 2022. The Prime Minister and the Office of the Attorney General, but most definitely in all instances, there has been consistently the message that in January 2022, we expect the process of crafting and developing and consulting on excuse me, a new constitution to begin. That is not what we're here for today, Mr. President. What has also been said, and I wish to take the opportunity today to repeat, Mr. President, is that the new constitution, because consultative processes on significant bodies of legislation like a constitution take time, because people don't always understand the details. I am not a lawyer, and sometimes legal language may escape me, and so I understand that. And so the decision has been made and said publicly that the process of constitutional consultation will take place chapter by chapter, month by month, stretching over the course of the year 2022, so that by the time the process has been completed, that which would have evolved from the belly of our people and from our nation would be reflective of a new constitution that has been seen and agreed by all concerned. That is not what we're here for today, Mr. President, and it continues to be unfortunate that seminal moments in our history, watershed moments in our history, continue to fall prey to politics and politicking and misinformation. And in moments where, on an instrument like this, we ought to be sharing that which is factual with our people, we choose to take another route and to create confusion among our people at a time where we should be being constructive and taking people along with us, even where there is legitimate and understandable angst, or in some instances, a lack of understanding. But rather than in some instances, Mr. President, and I regret to say this, attempting to provide clarity to those who do not understand, we fuel those fires in pursuit of our own narrow political gain. So I want to use the time here today, Mr. President, to go through the facts of the Charter, to speak to the specifics that are contained therein, and to give a broad outline of what it is and what it is not. But more importantly, Mr. President, to speak a little bit about why a charter. If it is not legally binding, why do it? If it has no force of law, what is the point? If it can't be used as a means to have a civil or criminal charge brought against someone, what is the point? Mr. President, we are far more than a nation of laws. We are a nation built on values. We are a nation built on certain basic principles that have stayed with us throughout the course of time. Those values don't change. They may evolve, but they do not change. We still believe in basic courtesy, Mr. President. We still believe in kindness. We still believe in the principles of family. We still believe in the principles of love and acceptance. We still believe, Mr. President, that we must treat to each other in a way that is inspiring and uplifting. Those are not things that are contained in law or legal documents, Mr. President. They are reflective of values. So why a charter, Mr. President, if it doesn't have the force of law? Because we are a values-based society. And I use the word we in this instance, Mr. President, because I want to focus on the fact that we is not a singular word. Say that again. We is not a singular word, neither does it relate to singularity. We means all of we. Me and you. The man down the road, Mr. President, who don't believe in nothing. The man down the road, Mr. President, who is a Christian. The man down the road who is a Muslim. The man down the road who does not believe that anything exists beyond himself. I may fundamentally disagree with that, but he is included in the we too. Mr. President, we, the people, captured in the very first sentence of this charter, are based on a collection of values that shape our day-to-day interactions with each other. And it was felt by this administration that we needed to have a charter that encapsulated in a single place those values, those principles that bind us together. And I don't want to talk about things that have happened in the last 3 years, Mr. President, 22 months more specifically. Mr. President, we went through a restructuring of our finances. There were people who were able to weather that storm more than others. That is always going to be the way of the world, but we said together, we have to help those who do not have. It is because, Mr. President, of us looking out for the we and those values that we did things over the last few years like help our neighbors who didn't have food. It is for the reason that we had a we together that we incorporated things like care packages, Mr. President. It is because there is a we that Barbados still to this day does not pay for testing, unlike most other countries in the world, in the middle of a COVID pandemic, and has absorbed all of those costs to ourselves. Because we have to look out for each other. And in difficult times and at difficult moments, the we becomes more important than it was in good times. So, Mr. President, this charter encapsulates all of the basic principles that are meant to reflect who we are as we, the people of Barbados. It is our 55th year of constitutional independence, and we reaffirm our commitment to the fundamental rights and freedoms won by those who came before us. Mr. President, this brings me to the second part of what I want to share today. Those who came before us. I said, Mr. President, the values and principles that we all believe in have not changed. They may simply have evolved. And they have evolved over time, Mr. President. And why is that? Because time, circumstances, people, communities, lives evolve over time. We don't remain stagnant. And the things that our ancestors fought for in their incarnation, abolition of slavery, emancipation, amelioration of the conditions of slavery, independence, regionalism, all of those things are incorporated in this charter, Mr. President, because they went before us. But we have to ask ourselves now, Mr. President, how do we stop in a single moment of time, capture where we have gone before, and still craft a future for where we have to go next? That is what this charter is about, Mr. President. Now, I want to address a few things, Mr. President, beyond the question of values. There are a series of fundamental rights and freedoms that are incorporated in here, Mr. President. Some of them are accepted. Some of them are the source of great contention and dispute. Mr. President, Barbados is a part of an international community that has signed a range of multilateral agreements and covenants over the course of our lifetime. We signed on in the 1970s to instruments including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We subsequently had the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Convention on Racial Discrimination. Those were not principles, Mr. President, or values that everyone had throughout the annals of time. In fact, it was to the contrary. Those were hard-fought-for values that were subsequently codified in international legal instruments and thereafter domesticated in domestic law here in Barbados and in countries all around the world, because they were not principles that everyone agreed with. We now have, I made reference to it, the CEDAW Convention, Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Had there not been a suffragettes movement, had there not been a move to ensure that there was universal enfranchisement for women, we would not be here, Mr. President. And up until the 1970s, when some of these instruments were finalized, the principle of universal enfranchisement and voting rights for women were still not reflective of every country around the world. And that is something that started in the 1920s and even before the First World War in 1914. And it went on for ages, Mr. President, interrupted by a world war and started back afterwards, picked up in places like the US and the UK in the 1920s and the 1930s, and culminated in places like Syria in 1976, Mr. President. It took ages for values, including the recognition of women and non-discrimination of women, to be incorporated in law. The same applies to racial discrimination. The same applies to things like gender equity. So, Mr. President, there is an unfortunate debate around an exultant moment like a Republican transition and the adoption of an important instrument like a charter that reflects our values as a people around whether or not we should include language that speaks to sexual orientation. I heard yesterday in the other place that these are matters which have not been settled internationally and therefore Barbados should not attempt to pronounce on them in this charter. Mr. President, I reject that wholeheartedly. And I stand here as a girl who has pronounced on more than one occasion. I was raised in a Pentecostal church. I remain a member of a non-denominational assembly that, if you were to put it in its traditional sense, it probably may fall under the Pentecostal umbrella. I spent many, many years as a worship leader, as a youth. I don't do that stuff anymore, but that is my grounding, Mr. President. When people ask me, but Lisa, don't you get uncomfortable speaking in public? And I say, no. They say, but where did you learn to get comfortable speaking in public? I learned in church and Sunday school, Mr. President, doing recitations for harvest and Christmas programs, Mr. President. I came from in that community and I remain a part of that community. Mr. President, on mornings, if you call me before a certain time, you still spend my mornings to this day in worship and devotion. When my daughter was younger, Mr. President, and I would take my daughter to school, I would turn my phone off and I wouldn't have my volume on because I drove her to school and she and I would sing together in the car, listening to our music, because that is who I am. It is still who I am now, Mr. President. In my car, I hardly listen to the radio because I always have worship on in my car. That is who I am. But I stand here today, Mr. President, based on all of that, to say that I reject that on the basis of my faith, that a person who has a different sexual orientation than me should be outside of the framework of a value system that says all men are created equal. That all persons who, whatever they stand for, whatever they reflect, that they are supposed to be on the outside of that we, the people of Barbados. That we don't agree that even in our subsequent engagements with people. As life evolves, people evolve, and our circumstances and our communities evolve, that persons with a different sexual orientation than us should not also be incorporated in the protections that are afforded to me in my Christian faith, Mr. President. I don't accept that. I reject it in its entirety, and it goes against who I am. And Mr. President, if I were to put that in context, I think perhaps that came home to me most vividly a few years ago, perhaps by no more than a few years ago. I lived in an African country for 4 years. And perhaps that was maybe my eye-opener to sometimes how insularly we view ourselves and the world, and sometimes our faith. God is omnipotent, He's omniscient, He's all-present, yes. But if we were born in a different country, a different part of the world that believed very differently than our Western society, we may see the world very differently, Mr. President. And I lived in that African country for 4 years. And in that 4 years, Mr. President, I saw a country that was multicultural and multi-faith. You had Christians, you had Muslims, you had people who believed in their ancestral traditions, and they believed in African traditions and African religions, and they kept those things up. And in some instances, the two things attempted to coexist side by side. I was a little confused sometimes, but that was what it was. But they found a way, Mr. President, to understand and to accept that within a single society, every person, whatever their beliefs were, they were covered under the provisions of the law, and they were captured under the values of the society as equal members of the society. I cannot imagine that the community that I am a part of, a proud part of to that extent, would want to call attention to themselves for what they may not even understand to be discriminatory practices. I don't think that that is what is intended. And I don't think that they mean to discriminate, but the reality of it is that intentions sometimes don't matter. That is actually what you are calling for. You are calling for the exclusion of a group of persons from the protection of the law and from the exclusion of our system because they don't fit in with your faith-based beliefs. That, Mr. President, is the role of pastors and priests internal to their congregations. You can, if you wish, make determinations on how internal to your church may function. But the role of the state and of any government is to ensure that when we speak of we the people, we include everybody, including people who would never darken the doors of my church assembly. It must include the people who are on the inside of our church assemblies who do not feel comfortable standing up to say, this is who I am, because they know that there's a rejection coming their way. That may be okay in principle, and we don't agree with it inside a church environment, but Mr. President, that is not the role of a government. And I know that when the Honourable Prime Minister spoke about citizenship and understanding civics and who we are as governments, I think that there is a critical responsibility for us to spend time as governments, as leaders, as University of the West Indies, and so on, with our church leaders, educating and sharing on the difference between the role of the church and the state. There has to be that understanding, because so much of what is being said and what is being written demonstrates that they don't understand that the concept of righteousness has no force of law. It is not a concept that can be administered by the state. So if you think someone is unrighteous or this is not in the image of God, that is not the role of the state to adjudicate. The state has to ensure that every Barbadian, every person who walks down the street is afforded protection under our laws, and that we understand that even where the law does not cover, a person has to still be covered by certain values. We must not abuse people. We must not treat to them disrespectfully. We must be able to embrace people. There are things that must not necessarily be legislated, Mr. President, but they must also be reflective of goodness, of acceptance, of our humanness as individuals, Mr. President. And that is what this charter is about. And so there is no way that in 2021 that Barbados would find itself unable or able to leave out the issue of sexual orientation. But I want to take a moment, Mr. President, to raise something for your attention. I'm going to read, this is on it is a paper that talks about the debate surrounding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, when it was adopted, and some of the important discussions that went into the declaration and what came out of it. And I'm amenable to making it a document of the House. Mr. President, the paper says most Muslim majority countries that were then members of the UN signed the declaration in 1948, including Afghanistan, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Turkey, which had an overwhelmingly Muslim population but an officially secular government, also voted in favor. Saudi Arabia was the sole abstainer on the declaration among Muslim nations, claiming that it violated Sharia law. Pakistan, officially an Islamic republic, signed the declaration and critiqued the Saudi position, strongly arguing in favor of including religion as a fundamental freedom. Moreover, some Muslim diplomats from these same countries would later help draft other human rights treaties under the UN. For example, Iraq's representative to the UN, he insisted on wording that recognized gender equality, which resulted in Article 3 of the ICCPR and the ICSCR, which together with the Universal Declaration formed the International Bill of Rights. Mr. President, I'm going to skip here down to this section which says this. It says, the resistance to implementation of international human rights standards in parts of, I've lost where I was. In parts of the Muslim and Arab worlds is perhaps most salient with the implementation of rights related to religion. In terms of the Declaration of Human Rights, the core of the resistance was centered on issues of the right of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, as well as the prohibition of discrimination against women. This was at the time of the adoption and the negotiation for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, Mr. President. These are all principles that subsequently became adopted in dedicated standalone instruments. They became principles that if we talk about them now in 2021, Mr. President, we take them for granted with no knowledge in some instances of how hard fought for they were. Mr. President, I put, and this administration puts, sexual orientation in the same category of all of those hard fought for issues that will occupy the international community's attention for the coming time. And they are no different than those for which we have already fought, Mr. President. We cannot, on the basis of our individual religion, attempt to exclude any category of person from the protection of the law. Mr. President, the other element that I want to treat to, which is also in the preambular section of the document, is the question of the creator. This has created significant angst, pun intended, around the use of language. I am looking forward to the presentation by the chairman, the co-chairman of the committee that drafted this, who sits in this house, and I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge what we consider to be the outstanding work done by the committee, chaired and co-chaired, I should say, in this place by Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers. I think the Prime Minister outlined in great detail that there were approximately 16 or 17 consultations which covered over 32,000 persons at different times, including public town halls. Now, Mr. President, it took a significant amount of time and effort and patience, no doubt, to create what we have before us in the Charter. And I appreciate the work that was done by a cross-section of partners. Mr. President, we live in a country where oftentimes people say, I ain't voting, I ain't going to vote, I ain't going to call the election, I ain't going to voting. People say that. But then in response to that, there are others who will say to them, but if you don't participate, then when you complain at the end, the role you should have played should have been before and not after the fact. If you don't contribute to the governance of your country, then you can't complain afterwards. Some people feel, well, you can't complain when it was time to show up, you didn't show up. There are times, Mr. President, where people do not step forward for public office because they just don't want the hassle. They don't want to have to deal with all that goes along with it, Mr. President. But if we don't step forward, then who, Mr. President? If we don't step forward despite all that goes along with it, Mr. President, we probably don't have a right to complain. And so, Mr. President, it is disheartening for me that Senator Rogers and the other members of the committee would have invested so much time and effort in a public consultative process, advertised in newspapers, in some instances with full-page ads, all over social media, on TV, sent out invitations, and those who chose or opted not to participate at the time are now, after the fact, lamenting the absence of consultation. There's something fundamentally wrong about that. But what is interesting, Mr. President, is that when I read the report, on page 5 of the report itself, one of the very entities that is lamenting the absence of consultation submitted a report and comments on the draft. It is disingenuous, Mr. President, and it is inconsistent with the principles that I stand for. It is unfortunate. You, one, had an opportunity to consult and to participate. If you chose to stay on the outside of the process, well, say so. If you chose not to participate in any of the town halls or you felt that you were not invited specifically, well, say so. But you cannot accuse the committee of not consulting widely, because that is not factual. The other part of it that I would say, Mr. President, is that we as a church have to be very careful. We have to be very, very careful not to allow persons with overt and obvious political agendas to infiltrate our midst and lead us down the garden path. And I read with great interest some of the comments that were made in yesterday's newspaper, which didn't have anything to do with the church or God, but were clearly political objectives, things like referendum. Where did that come from, Mr. President? How is that falling under the umbrella of this particular issue? It was an unfortunate insertion, Mr. President. But I want to say that we have an obligation to consult. I believe this administration has consulted probably more than any other. We have put everything out there, and in this instance, we did not do it. The committee did it. The committee set up to do its work did just that. I think they did a stellar job, and I want to commend them for their commitment and their willingness to step forward and serve the public and the interests of Barbados. So on the question of the creator and the use of the language creator, Mr. President, I've already put it out there and I've said very clearly what my own religious persuasion is. I've already made it very clear that I am not a part of a ritual-based faith. I believe in a personal relationship with the God I serve. I call him God, I call him Father, I call him Abba. Sometimes I say, Father, you who created me, you knew me before I knew myself. Over to you. I don't have a lot of fancy words sometimes. I just say, Lord, over to you. I have no objection to the use of the language creator, Mr. President, because I, who have made it very publicly clear that I am a woman of faith. You will never see me, and I know it is political for that to be the case, and I draw a lot of ire from people who seem to think that I should be something that I'm not. You won't see me in certain spaces. That's a fact. You won't see me doing certain things. That's a fact. Deal with that. That is true. Because I am a person who believes in God. I'm a woman who I've said was raised in church. I still practice every day. I'm not perfect, like the leader of the opposition said yesterday. None of us are. But there are certain things that cannot be and will not be a part of my lifestyle because of that. It's what it is. But, Mr. President, I have no objection to the term creator, because he is my creator, Mr. President. I am not an evolutionist. There's some people who believe in evolution and they don't believe that anyone created them. They just evolved over time, Mr. President. I'm not that. I believe, like most other Christians I know, that God, our creator, is also our father. He's our savior. He's our master. He's our king. He's all those things. In other faith-based religions, Mr. President, they call him different things. In other religions where there is not a God per se, as it was in the case where I lived in Africa, you may have a symbol that may be their God. That is who they believe in. They are covered under we, the people, Mr. President. And so while I accept that God, for many faith-based organizations and for myself, is our term of use, the ability for a government to be inclusive and to ensure that no one feels excluded is what this charter is about. I also want to go to this last section of the paper of the charter. So we have the preambular section. Article 1 speaks about human rights. Those are already covered. They're incorporated in our Constitution. They are reflective of all of the international instruments to which we have signed in terms of economic and social rights. But we've also gone beyond that, Mr. President, and we've spoken about how we reject in our community all forms of oppression, intolerance. And we talk about it not just in its economic and social context, but we say economic, mental, verbal, or physical, and we commit to healing this nation. That is not legal language. That is exultant language, Mr. President, because that is who we are. That's where we're hoping to go. We talk about towards a just society. What is just? A society that evolved from slavery and oppression. What is just? A society that still deals with exclusion and marginalization, and in some instances, people not feeling as though they have a space in this country. We are working towards that. Is it perfect now? No, Mr. President, but if we've understood one thing about societies and time, is that there is no magic. It doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't happen today because you said so yesterday. It takes time. Every single transformational process in history takes time. We talked about women earlier, Mr. President, and women's voting rights. Are we still not today, in 2021, and inevitably on International Women's Day when we come around into 2022 next year, God spare life? Are we still not going to be talking about the glass ceiling for women? Are we still not going to be talking about making sure that there's equitable pay for men and women? There is no magic bullet, Mr. President, as some would have us to believe, that magic appears and we get to fix all the problems all at once. These are things that take time and in some instances have taken generations. But we are committed to moving towards a just society. We're committed to the ideal of diversity and to respect and equitable development. We have an institutionalized social partnership, and we have values that are outlined in Article 3 as well, which then go on to speak about democracy. In Article 5, Mr. President, I want to pause there for a minute. Because this talks about engaging the world. Now, I heard, again, an unfortunate discussion, or it was drawn to my attention. I didn't hear it myself. It was drawn to my attention that there is a debate being stirred up about, one, the invitation of His Royal Highness Prince Charles to Barbados to celebrate the Republic transition next week, and also what awards he is going to be afforded. Now, Mr. President, there's politics and there's politicking. But you see this section here in Article 5? It talks about engaging the world. I wish that people who have been educated and are supposedly teaching international relations and international politics and politics in particular and commentating on it would also have an understanding of what international diplomacy is all about, Mr. President. International diplomacy. There are some things, Mr. President, that are simply about diplomatic relations. We are making a signal to the world, and including to the UK and everywhere else within the Commonwealth, that while we are moving away from having the Queen as the head of state and having a Barbadian head of state, that we remain, one, a member of the Commonwealth, and that, two, we recognize the importance of our diplomatic relationships with the UK and its leadership, and that in the same way that we have historically also been conferred the highest honors, that we are making a signal to the world that this transition we are making is without rancor. It is without angst. It is without acrimony. And they are here to say, we support what you are doing, and we are diplomatically recognizing that. People need to stop politicking over things that they perhaps clearly do not understand. They really do. This is what diplomacy is about. Friends of all when satellites have none, but friends of all first, Mr. President. That is what we do. And so there should be and can be no issue with the presence of any member of the royal family here for this transition and any conferral of an award on any representative on the basis, Mr. President, of the fact that we must engage the world. We remain at 166 square miles with just under 300,000 people. We do not exist in this world on our own. And it is for this reason, Mr. President, that after the committee had done its work, these are some of the things that then were added into the charter. Engaging the world on the terms of multilateralism, the United Nations system and beyond, Mr. President. We call it South-South cooperation. South-South cooperation simply means, Mr. President, that we as developing countries need to embed our relationships with other developing countries in the way that we have historically done with developed countries, Mr. President. So our relationships with Africa, with Latin America, with the Pacific, we have to embed our relationships with other like-minded countries. And then there's a question of regionalism, Mr. President. One of the most hard-fought-for gains was the creation of the CARICOM single market and economy. The CARICOM community, it had its predecessor, Mr. President, that was unfortunately a failure, but the principles and the values of regionalism and what we would call in international relations multilateral pool sovereignty, pooling our resources for the purpose of engaging with the world. That is what regionalism has been for us. Is it perfect, Mr. President? No, it is not. But it is again an example of how development and growth take time. When we listen to some people, including in this place, Mr. President, you think that they have this utopian, unrealistic, idealistic idea of development. As if it's by magic. In 3 years, you should have done this and you should have done that. As if there is any example anywhere in history, anywhere in the world of development doing anything other than taking time and being built in incarnations. Mr. President, I want to close my presentation of this resolution by talking about where we must go next. Mr. President, we have evolved over time in the way that I have described. We still have a long way to go. There are those who argue not now, later. There are those who argued it when we had the debate on the appointment of a president and the transition from a governor general. Mr. President, there are those that argued not no on women's suffrage. There are those that argued not no on emancipation. There will always be a moment in time, Mr. President, where there are going to be troubles. That is the nature of nation building. That is the nature of growth and development. There will always be imperfections. Tomorrow we may have something that we didn't have yesterday, Mr. President. If not now, Mr. President, well then let's do it next year. What happens next year, Mr. President? If COVID has taught us one thing, it is that we don't have time on our side. Anything can happen. 4 years ago, Mr. President, we were facing a financial crisis, the worst of our times. 2 years ago, we were preparing to have a strong season, Mr. President, and here strong economic performance. We were preparing for growth and recovery. Now, 22 months later, we are in the throes still of a pandemic and dealing with what is before us and what 2022 will bring. Mr. President, when 2020 came to an end, everybody was saying, we can't wait. Nobody would have imagined that we would have had our second surge at the end of 2020. Mr. President, we don't have any time put down, and I don't know if there are members in here or any other place or anywhere else that know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know, Mr. President, but what I know is that at every watershed moment in our history, there has always been a reason why not. And that history has vindicated everyone who has said yes, no. And it has frowned on those who have found a reason, Mr. President, to want to delay the ordinary course of development. History will write its part. And so in closing, Mr. President, I want to say this. We don't know what our future holds. But we do know, Mr. President, that if you have a surgery, there are people who, my father, for example, had eye surgery a few months ago. And right after he had surgery, he couldn't see. And he had to have these things across his eyes. As it started to clear, he could make out shapes and forms. And over time, it got better. And it got clearer. And he could see farther and farther. Mr. President, this morning, I reflected on that because I was listening to a sermon by T.D. Jakes. It was called The Art of Knowing. People are quoting all kinds of things. I quote, because I'm Christian, I quote the fact that I was listening to a sermon by T.D. Jakes called The Art of Knowing. And in it, he made me laugh because he used an example that reminded me of my father. And he said, you don't necessarily see what is before you now, but you trust that you're not where you once were. Barbados is not where it once was. We as a people are not who we once were. But we have taken a moment of time to stake stock and encapsulate who we want to be in a charter of Barbados and where we want to be in time. And that shape and those forms may not be perfectly clear to everybody now. But the vision is that we will be a just society. We will be an equitable society. We will be a democratic society. We will be an inclusive society. We will be a country that engages the world. That is the long-term vision. And we cannot, Mr. President, make decisions because right now our vision may be blurred and that all we may see may be shapes and forms, Mr. President. We have to make decisions for where we want to go. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, sir, let me just say that rightly so, the honourable member who has led the debate said that this is not a legally binding document. I see it as somewhat as a statement of intent, a document that is trying to guide the vision for the future of Barbados. And for those Barbadians who have difficulties with any part of this document, there will be a time and place to freely express your difficulties. And that will happen in the constitutional reform. Because really and truly, when we go through that process, the Constitution is not necessarily, yes, the government has started and initiated that process, but the Constitution will belong to us. It should be formed by us. And a lot of the dialogue that is happening now, I am calling on all Barbadians who believe that there are things that they either agree or don't agree with, make sure their views, Mr. President, are heard once that constitutional reform process begins. That is where the heart and the substance of the matter will be. And I leave that one there, Mr. President. But back to the charter, which is being debated. Sir, as I said, I believe it is a statement of intent, and this is the second version of it I've seen. There was an earlier version which, based on the comments, have now been revised and laid in this honourable chamber. But in reading it, I had to reflect on the question of what is a nation? And it has to be that we are placing this conversation by way of saying that a nation is clearly a group of individuals that share some kind of geographic location, they share some culture or cultures, a governance structure, but also share some philosophical and ideological ideals, virtues, and morals, Mr. President. Sir, it has to also be that a nation, it is not just then the physical. A nation is also a collective energy. When we come together, sir, there's an energy that is present among us. There's an ethos driving that energy as well. Sir, some countries are known for their beliefs in things like individual freedom and liberty. That is the ethos of their society. There are other countries, Mr. President, that are squarely and grounded in spiritual or religious beliefs, theocracies as we call them. And sir, there are also some that are known for their communal spirit, their acknowledgement of interdependence. The African word Ubuntu, I am because you are, also is one of those areas that people ground their society in. Sir, and when you ask yourself, what is a nation? And what is it that represents the Barbadian? We have to then clearly understand what are those defining characteristics of our island. What are the defining characteristics of the people? What is it, Mr. President, that the Barbadian stands for and fiercely defends? Sir, I believe that the Charter is an attempt to start the conversation. It attempts to start to answer this question about who we are as a nation now, and more importantly, in the future. And sir, it is reflected in the Charter itself, because it says, and it ends with the line, may the commitment we now champion, given all that is said in the Charter, progressively foster and nurture the soul of our nation from generation to generation. So, sir, I will stand here and I will maturely say that I am one of those persons who do not agree with the how, the process. But I do stand here as well and say that the Charter and the process by which it went through is an opportunity for us to lay our intent as a people. Sir, having gone through and continuing to go through COVID, we have an opportunity to chart a new course. And that course will be very much defined by what is happening locally and internationally. Sir, the way we live, work, and recreate will be subsumed by the existential threat and crisis of climate change. It will be subsumed. And sir, this is not something that has come as a surprise to many who have been following what has been happening globally. Sir, over the last 70 years, there have been many who have sounded the alarm. At the time, they may have been deemed crazy. Oh, don't mind those persons, they don't know what they're talking about. But 70 years on, now we realize the wisdom in what they were saying at the time. Sir, persons like Herman Daly, Donella Meadows, persons who would have understood that there are limits to how we as a society, we as a human race, progress and develop at the cost of the earth and its natural environment. Regionally, we had persons like Professor Norman Gervan, Professor Dennis Pantin, who would have also, in the regional context, sounded the alarm based on the development path that we were on. And they warned us against this continued reliance, sir, on economic growth fueled by fossil fuels, indiscriminate extraction of resources, and the exploitation of people. And sir, why am I bringing this lens to the Charter? Because, sir, I believe that how we as a society organize resources, how we organize people to produce and consume is also a reflection of our value system. The two, Mr. President, are intertwined. Sir, as we move towards becoming a parliamentary republic, COVID has laid bare most of our systemic failures in society. It has now made many across the globe question the political economy of neoliberalism and the underlying principles of capitalism. Sir, I believe that we are in an age of transition. The evolutionary process is in motion. And where we must take the lessons of the age that is ending and take them into the future in conjunction with ideas that are fit for purpose for that journey going forward. So we have to recognize that the 20th century frameworks of not just economics, but also of governance and politics may be failing us. We have to come to that realization. And in order, sir, for us to create a better 21st century paradigm by which we live by, Mr. President, we have to acknowledge those failures. Sir, many will say that the construct of capitalism rewards things like selfishness, greed, conflict, oppression. That is what some would say. So we have to then reconcile within ourselves socioeconomic structure that are at odds with the vision that we want for ourselves. Sir, our highest virtues, whether that be love, honesty, compassion, trust, and truth, have to be commonplace in a Barbados of the 21st century, and they have to drive both our society and our economy. Parts of this charter that move us in the right direction. In Article 1 under Human Rights, it states, "We therefore reject in our community all forms of oppression, intolerance, discrimination, and abuse, whether economic, mental, verbal, or physical, and we commit to healing this nation and its people from the shame, pain, and injustice of slavery on which it was founded." Sir, how do we heal, in particular, the oppression, the intolerance, the discrimination, and abuse that was met by our people in the economic construct of what was a colonial past? And how do we heal the people of this nation in economic terms? Sir, it means then that we have to change what I would call our economic DNA. We have to change our economic DNA to heal this country. And sir, you might ask, what do I mean by this? Sir, the economy is not this sterile object that is characterized by numbers and statistics and percentages. That is how people see it. But sir, it really and truly is the way in which we satisfy our wants and our needs in relation to how we use the resources of the earth and then how we relate to other people. Mr. President, Barbados was crafted out of a plantation economy. And in that plantation economy, all we did in that era, by and large, was extract from the land. Sure, cane cultivation, sir, stripped the soil of its nutrients, and as we know, many were exploited for their labor. Again, I say, we cannot separate the way in which our economy is structured and our value system. If the value system is based on something that is extractive, if the economy is based on extractive uses, and we see things just to be used and discarded, we see people as objects just for 8 hours a day and a compensation, Mr. President, we will not reach those highest values that we are seeking to achieve. Sir, many would say we've moved on from the plantation economy. We are now a service-based economy. And that tourism is different. But, sir, tourism, due to our own making, has also exhibited characteristics of being highly extractive and highly exploitive. Sir, many of our natural habitats across the coastline have been degraded in the name of the economic pursuits. So in the 1980s, we had 30 hectares of wetlands in Barbados. In 2005, it was only 4 hectares. I would be more than surprised I would not be surprised, sir, if it's less today. So, sir, the ecological footprint then of tourism has cost us. It has cost us from the ecological standpoint. Habitats that would have naturally provided things like free purification of coastal waters, coastal protection, and act as a nursery for fish and other marine species, we have chosen to forego in the name of the expansion of the tourism product. So, sir, when we then ask ourselves, what is the virtues associated with the economic policies of Barbados? What is the value system that it is based on? It cannot then be one that is based on sustainability, because the economic growth that we were in pursuit of through that tourism expansion across Barbados, particularly on our coastlines, was more dominant than things like environmental sustainability, social sustainability, because we were anchored in profit-driven economics, which is all part and parcel of a capitalist society. As I said, sir, because of COVID, many questions are being asked about the way in which we organize ourselves and we satisfy our wants and our needs based on certain principles. Sir, and then on the other hand, we cannot then condemn on the international stage others for pursuing GDP growth and development through the burning of fossil fuels, yet in our own home and in our own backyard, destroy our island in the name of the same growth. And sir, what we have to come to terms with very quickly is that the things that we are trying to uphold within this construct of our society called the capitalist economy will collapse. They have been collapsing because we have been so narrow in our focus about what it is we want in terms of growth and development. We have not accounted, sir, in any real way the social and environmental costs of our production systems and our consumption patterns. So, sir, if it is that the major part of our society, which is the day-to-day activities related to economic activity, are failing us, the question also has to be, how do we construct an economy that is fit for purpose for the 21st century? How do we create an economy that serves the most vulnerable? How do we create an economy that protects our environment and then ultimately places value on our highest virtues? Sir, the Charter speaks to some of these key areas. Article 1, towards a just and equitable society, as was mentioned, and Article 4, the environment, sustainable development, and resilience. So these are terms and words that have weight in what a new economy should look like for Barbados. Sir, because there has been so much contention since COVID in relation to how people are valued within the economic system, new paradigms are emerging that are questioning the way in which we put together scarce resources and people to produce and consume. So one of those new economic paradigms is called donut economics. It's by Kate Raworth and an Oxford economist. And it is gaining a lot of popularity across the globe. Because, to be frank, many persons are sick and tired of the current system and the way in which it exploits those in a lower socioeconomic spectrum. We see it now as there's seems to be a mass exodus of persons who are not going back to work in the US. that phenomenon is coming out of the COVID environment. Persons would rather not work than to be exploited. Even after, Mr. President, the stimulus checks have dried up, they're not returning to work. Is it about 6 million persons? People are realizing there's something fundamentally wrong with me, given my time and effort, sacrificing family life, and all the other things that are virtuous to them for the economic dollar. People are shifting away from the current value system that places money, greed, and profit above human life and dignity, Mr. President. Sir, as I was saying, donut economics is one of those paradigms that is making momentum across the globe. And it is an alternative to the neoclassical economics, which currently dictates a lot of the policy related to economic and social development. And what it does, it shifts away from the what is question to what ought to be. So what ought to be the purpose of an economy? Sir, if we are asking these types of questions in an environment where there is so much social tension, where it seems to be labor against capital, where there's an environment that the resources that we're using are being degraded at an alarming rate that they cannot regenerate, Mr. President. It is our duty now to design an economy that improves the well-being of all while respecting the limits that govern our environment and climate. Because, Mr. President, you cannot have a thriving and successful tourism industry, but you have a wasteland of coastline or marine environment where there is absolutely nothing, no species, no wildlife in your waters. How do you have a tourism product with no beaches? Because there's no natural coastal protection anymore. So, sir, in one instance, we focused on the economics of it while ignoring the environment that supports it. Sir, this concept of donut economics is now asking for countries across the world to move away from GDP growth being the central metric for economic progress. It is asking for a focus to be placed on environmental safety and socially just societies. And it is based, sir, on 7 principles. As I said, you move away from GDP being the central metric of your economic policy to a more inclusive, sustainable metric. Sir, it is asking for us to not see the economy as this, as I said, sterile concept, but something that is embedded within our natural environment, and recognizing that there is a cost to the value that we create in the economic system that must be accounted for if generations to come have to benefit or have the opportunity to benefit from the current standard of living that we currently enjoy. Sir, it says that we now must move away from seeing man as just this rational person who is only self-interested to one who is a social being, who is adaptable. Because when we see persons as being just rational and they're only interested in their own self-interest, you do create then this society that is based off of selfishness. Sir, we have to also look at our society as a dynamic system. We have to move away from the concept of trying to fix one thing with a myopic view. A good example, Mr. President, of that was earlier this year, the government, well-intentioned, increased the minimum wage for Barbadians. But the minimum wage, Mr. President, was only a subset of a larger problem. The larger problem is the cost of living. The larger problem was the cost of living. And now we find ourselves in a position where globally, due to increasing inflation rates, we have to revisit how we work and operate and consume in Barbados. And these are the difficult conversations, sir, that we're going to have. Because it cannot just be materialism is what is the order of the day. It cannot be that we are consuming, sir, based off of some ideal that was embedded in 20th century thinking. Because one, sir, cannot afford it. Our current disposition as it relates to our finances is saying that at some point in the near future, Mr. President, if it is that international financing is reduced, especially when the extended fund facility that we're in with the IMF comes to an end next year, some major adjustments will have to be made if we cannot earn the amount of money that is necessary to support the lifestyles that Barbadians have become accustomed to. Sir, another principle that is very relevant is that we have to design economies that are willing to distribute value. Distribute value. Because, Mr. President, at the moment, when we talk about things like GDP, for instance, we throw around an absolute number, $6 billion worth. But who owns the $6 billion? How is that distributed across the Barbadian landscape? Is it that 5% of persons own 80% of the $6 billion and the rest of us are just feeding off of the crumbs? And those are the types of things that we have to dig into and delve into when we are moving towards things like a just society. Sir, it has to be also an economy that is regenerative. As I said, we can no longer, Mr. President, ignore the environmental costs and the social costs of the things that we are doing in this country. Because we cannot say we are a just society, and yet we have workers in this country saying they are yet to receive any compensation in relation to their social benefits. That is not a just society, Mr. President. Sir, I am a part of a civil society organization called Regenerate Barbados. And we have established this civil society organization based on those principles that I just outlined to you, because we recognize that there's something fundamentally flawed with the current political economy in Barbados. It is not serving all. We can do better in that regard. And it is certainly not, in this current moment, the economic system in its current dispensation is not environmentally safe. And more so, Mr. President, we have to also redefine, as I said earlier, this idea of what we consider as Barbadians progress. What do we consider prosperity? And the Charter, Mr. President, speaks to it. The Charter speaks to progress being defined as our duty of care to one another, which recognizes economic enfranchisement, access to food and nutritional security, affordable and efficient public transportation, water, sanitation, universal quality education, quality health care, affordable housing, and the provision of social protections. So, sir, if we are saying that that is how we are defining our progress in the 21st century, how are we then going to know whether we are making progress or not if we are relying solely on the concept of gross domestic product and the growth of the economy? Sir, it cannot be the dominant metric that we use. There has to be a radical shift by which we measure the progress that we are so desperately in need of. Sir, it has to be more than us relying on things like conspicuous consumption to determine whether we're doing well or not. It has to be more than the C plus I plus G plus net exports for those who are versed in economic formulation. It has to be, sir, about those things, but it has to be also about how they're distributed. What is the cost of those things? Sir, and it has to be established in equity. And we cannot do that. We cannot measure those things that which we say are our progress using the constructs of 20th century economics. So, and I also want to say that I am framing this presentation in this way because I believe that all things are interdependent and interrelated. Because people who feel safe, people who have a sense of purpose, sir, people who feel as though their children have a future, they're getting a quality education, sir, people who believe that they can own a piece of the rock, those things are important. And those also then make up the collective well-being of this country. And there are many persons across Barbados that will say to you that this country is not well, mind, body, or soul. And that is their view. That is their current reality. That is their lived experience at the moment. But, sir, how do we capture that? How do we know when we are rectifying it in a way that is tangible? Sir, what I am speaking of today may seem very off the cuff for some. But these types of ideas, sir, are making ground across the world. Sir, in the United States, Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, in June of this year, put forward to Congress in the United States the Genuine Progress Indicator Act. And she, the Congresswoman at the time, was saying that the Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI, should be used alongside GDP in the United States of America. Because, Mr. President, it is a broader measurement of how society is performing. And it includes not just economic measures, but also social aspects. It also includes environmental aspects. So things like poverty, crime, inequality are included in the Genuine Progress Indicator. So New Zealand launched their first well-being budget in 2019, shifting the country away from being anchored in GDP growth and move and understanding and acknowledging that people's spiritual well-being is important. Things like family are important, but you have to find a way to measure these things. To give it lip service, sir, is not enough anymore. Because people are starting to realize at the ground level that the system is not designed for them to thrive. It is designed for others to live at the expense of those who are being oppressed. So what I am suggesting, Mr. President, is that Barbados makes a very bold move, which in turn would support this transition to a parliamentary republic, where the constitutional changes, sir, that are enshrining the rights, the dignity, and the freedom of Barbadians is also met with a new economic ethos. One where the Barbadian economy is primarily driven and policy formulation is centered around being an environmentally safe and socially just economy. And it is being designed in a way, sir, that meets the basic needs of all in society, while at the same time respecting the local ecological limits, Mr. President, and being able to adapt to external threats. That is the type of economy, Mr. President, that we should be striving for. So, sir, if we are saying that there's a broader spectrum of things that we want to capture for progress, there's a broader set of things that defined our well-being as a people, we cannot then say it and do not try to capture it and measure it year on year so we know where we are going. Sir, we have to, in a new way, capture our social, economic, and environmental progress so that we understand how we are healing, because that is the language of the Charter. The Charter spoke to healing the nation. So what is it then, Mr. President, that we are proposing as a nation that will measure that healing, that will be an indicator of how well our public policy is seeking to heal Barbadians? Sir, because it cannot be that, as I said earlier, we have an economy that's worth, I believe at the end of September, it was around $6 billion. And we say we want to grow the economy in the next 2 years to 10 billion. But we have no idea how that is being distributed. We have no idea how that growth is affecting everyone. We do not know where the value is being created further down the line. For those who are, let's say, for instance, a shopkeeper or somebody who has a small business. So we have to be able to start to really measure these things. And we cannot grow the economy, Mr. President, from, let's say, $6 billion to $10 billion at the sacrifice then of things like, say, our water quality, where because of the investment that is being created to increase economic activity without any kind of consideration to how that activity is affecting our groundwater supply. These are the types of things, Mr. President, that I am talking about. Sir, we have to have an economy that is reflective of the values and the ideals that are outlined in this charter. and more so, Mr. President, to the new Constitution of Barbados. But, sir, we cannot commit to it in just word and not in deed. We have to have some kind of new economic philosophy that guides our public policy formulation for the economy and society. And, sir, it must be based on a conviction of ideals. Because what people are realizing now in this COVID environment, very, very quickly, Mr. President, and I will say to the government, be very careful of the things you say that are not aligned with the things that you are doing. And I say that very sincerely. I say that very sincerely, Mr. President, because there are some people out there, Mr. President, that are on their last bit of hope. There's not much more they can bear. And if it is that the current administration is saying one thing, Mr. President, but even if it is not, even in perception, it is seen as being hypocritical. Sir, those are the seeds that will rip this country apart. I'm not asking you, Mr. President, I am telling you. People are at their last bit of hope. The government has to lead by example, not just in word, not just in charters, Mr. President, but by action, by their deeds. The truth must align in what you say and what you do. There are many Barbadians that are hurting, Mr. President, and if they feel as though they are being neglected by their own government, it will be at the cost of all of us in that collective society, in this collective society, Mr. President. Sir, I want to end by saying a few words by Marcus Garvey, because I believe it is a reflection of where we are right now. He says, "You at this time can only be destroyed by yourselves, from within and not from without. You have reached the point where the victory is to be won from within and can only be lost from within." Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Drakes. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting now be suspended and that we should return at 2:30 p.m.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 2:30 p.m. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This sitting stands suspended until 2:30 p.m.